So something kind of interesting popped up here. So this is a little tweet thread by Alex Zoltan. Canada clearly has a money laundering problem. You can't just walk into a bank and deposit cartel profits unless it's a Canadian bank, apparently. So we kind of covered this a bit before, and we done certain video segments about this, but Canada definitely does have a money laundering problem. One of the reasons why, um, we're in this predicament with the fentanyl crisis, why there's drug cartels, why there's criminal organizations continuing to run amok here in this country, is because of the deep corruption ties between these cartels and the Canadian government. And it has been stated numerous times that this corruption runs deep and why this continues to be a huge problem, why this should be a national security issue. But they have not opened this up. They have not investigated this. They have not properly reported all this because of all the interconnected ties to this. So here's just a bit of it here. So, an unelected banker is going to become Prime Minister of Canada, apparently, without being forced to answer a single critical question. Alas, there is no better time than now, I surmise, to start asking questions about Canadian money laundering on its behalf. So, he mentions about Mark Carney, who's going to be ushered in as the Canadian Prime Minister, just got elected in the, or selected in the party leadership race, and we don't know anything about this guy. We know that he's massively corrupted. We know that he has harsh business dealings. We know that there's a lot to be asked about Mark Carney, but no one's willing to ask it. Ever wondered how some people at the roulette wheel have bottomless pockets, or why so many empty condo buildings amidst a generational housing crisis? The answer to both of your questions is probably money laundering and money laundering. Money laundering is the art of making dirty cash look clean. It's considered one of the funnier parts of crime, largely because those who help launder money aren't scary cartel hitmen with face tattoos. They're bankers, real estate developers, and politicians playing cards. The best part of money laundering, aside from the gambling and speculative investing, is banks get fined, but no one gets arrested. Meanwhile, anti-Trudeau protesters and the guy on the street selling a few grams gets years in prison. Funny how that works. Except in this case, someone was arrested. Actually, a bunch of people were arrested, and they all worked for a Canadian bank called TD, that's Toronto Dominion Bank. Everything you need to know about money laundering can be gleaned from this one sensational, extraordinary, cautionary tale. This is the story of when Toronto Dominion, that's TD Bank, met David. And obviously that's in air quotes because David isn't actually his legal name. That's just an alias that they gave him to cover up the massive money laundering that he's about to pursue. So, this is David. Take a close look at this picture. Not at David, whose face is obscured by grainy camera footage and a K95 mask, but at what David is depositing. It is a mountain of cash, over $300,000 in cash bundled in $20 bills, the preferred denomination for money laundering. So, this goes on periodically in this country. And we know that's tied to drug trafficking. We know that's tied to human smuggling. We know that's tied to international gangs. We know that's tied to why mass migration and fraudulent documents brought people over here, particularly aligned with gangs, to cause a ruckus in this country. And yet, people know about this, and yet it's not brought to national spotlight. So, this is deep, dark corruption in this country. And this is why people like Donald Trump, out of all people, responded to Canada by putting an ultimatum on. Because if this is happening in Canada, polite and nice Canada, that's going to affect people in America. And America is not clean of this either, as you're about to find out. It's almost difficult to believe the picture until you realize the money laundering wasn't illegal in Canada until 1989. Think about that. So before the late 80s, before 1989, money laundering was legal. Cartels were allowed to operate in Canada and give money to the big banks in this scheme. Isn't that interesting? I didn't even know about this. Didn't even know about that. And if it wasn't shocking enough, it wasn't illegal in the United States until 1986. I had no idea about this. I'd assumed that money laundering, may have been illegal, like they did the law in the 50s, but not until the 80s. That's crazy. Point being, this isn't a crime either country has taken seriously for very long. That brings us back to David and TD Bank. 6 years before his arrest, David embarked on the incredibly stupid venture of laundering mounds of cash generated from a scale of deadly fentanyl, helping to kill tens of thousands of Americans, Canadians, and countless others. So, again, the money laundering connects to human trafficking networks, to fentanyl, drug distribution, international gangs that have fraudulent documents to be in this country and smuggled back and forth. It's all connected to underground networks. So again, I find it so hilarious that so many people, bite down on their tongue and cringe themselves and clutch their pearls over Donald Trump threatening the sovereignty of Canada, but yet our sovereignty is already being wrecked by crimes like this. Our safety, our national security has been jeopardized and compromised for many years because of this. David, whose real name is Da Yingzi, was a Chinese national living in Queens, New York, who helped orchestrate a 5-year, $653 million laundering scheme from the tri-state region. Laundering narcotics proceeds with help from the U.S. bank staff. Yes, you read that correctly. U.S. bank staff. But like I said, the United States is not off hook for this. This fentanyl crisis affects all of North America. This is an international problem, and it's not dealt accordingly, which is why we're in this mess. Indeed, Zing leveraged not Canadian, but American frontline employees at financial institutions, including, but not limited to, TD Bank, for over 5 years, proceeding $474 million in illicit cash, often from fentanyl sales, through branches in multiple states, not provinces. And how much did it cost David to bribe these U.S.-born frontline bankers to facilitate laundering nearly $1 billion in death merchant fentanyl proceeds? Just $57,000 in gift cards, apparently. Yeah, I know you're part of this illegal scheme and we want to hide this dark money that was used by killing people with deadly fentanyl. But hey, your next latte is on me. Wow. So it shows you how easy people can be corrupted. Just on a gift card. Now I know what they say. People do have a price tag to their soul, but for me, I would ask for a bit more than just a gift card. Like how low people's dignity has gone. So where does Canada come to play in here? Well, it does and it doesn't. Really. TD Bank, yes, TD Bank is a Canadian bank, and now reputed for poor laundering oversight. However, there is no direct evidence David Da Yingxing had any interactions with Canada or Canadian bankers whatsoever. There is simply no direct evidence in the available public records or legal documents from the case United States versus Deng Xing showing Xing had any personal interactions with Canada at all, such as traveling there, residing there, or conducting any activities in the country. Xing wasn't just depositing into TD either. He owned more than a dozen U.S. owned bank accounts to this date. And again, his activities, as outlined in legal proceedings, primarily took place in the United States, specifically in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania between 2016 and 2021. I don't think anyone will contest that TD's money laundering safeguards were insignificant. A picture tells 1,000 words, as the saying goes, and the picture of David depositing more cash than the teller wicked can handle says more than required. However, blaming an entire country, in this case Canada, for the reckless and irresponsible behavior of some reckless, irresponsible, and greedy U.S. bank tellers in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania is as foolish as blaming Donald Trump for a KFC grease fire in Winnipeg. So, that is kind of incredible, ladies and gentlemen. And what I get from it, especially that last part there, kind of highlights the whole perspective on the war on drugs. Because, so many people, we've been kind of notioned or kind of propagandized to put the blame on, say, Mexico, for example, or cartels in Latin America. And that's why they're so awful and disgusting and whatnot, and why we got to deal something with the southern border. But what people don't realize is the middleman that preemptively constructed these cartels, that are paying off these cartels, that are allowing them to flourish their businesses, that are the CIA that's sending intel and munitions to these cartels, that enlarging them in the southern parts of South America and into Mexico. People don't know about this, and they don't know about the interconnections of big banks that are profiting off this the drug epidemic. And if we really want to do something on the war on drugs, if we really want to do something on cracking down on illicit, like fentanyl, for example, then you also have to look at the banking. You also look at where the money is being placed and how these banks operate in the tune of this criminal organization. But sadly, they're not doing this. So, yes, it would be it's nice that, the RCMP is cracking down on super labs, that we're finally exposing the deadly fentanyl strains that are being exploited and being exported out of the country of Canada. That is important to note. But understand that bankers and financiers that are paying these cartels, that are paying these drug lords, is helping flourish this problem even greater. And if you really want to do something, you need to cut off those institutions. You need to cut off the banks from dealing with money laundering businesses that are allowing this corrupt organized crime to continue on into this country and the United States and Mexico and all around the world. And TD Bank, Chase Bank, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, they're all guilty of this. But he makes a great point that putting the blame solely on Canada, or putting the blame solely on Donald Trump and the United States, or even putting the blame just on Mexico, doesn't actually combat the problem head on. Because the problem head on is these large, too big to fail banks that are connected to this international crime syndicate that is exploiting these nations, that are exploiting the people. And they don't care that TD Bank is involved in money laundering because they barely get a slap on the wrist. They have to pay a fine. No one gets arrested. The bank doesn't shut down. They don't get criminally prosecuted. They do in Iceland. That was the last time that bankers did some shady operations. They got prosecuted in Iceland. And yet we have money laundering syndicates that go around to these big banks for many years, and they barely get a slap on the wrist. So that's how they're able to get away with it. And that's why organized crime continues to run havoc in this side of the world and all around the world, really. And you can't really put it down to one single output. You can't put it down to one single blame that's caused all this until you actually cut off the funding, cut off the munitions, stop allowing the CIA to flourish the cartels to cause this problem as part of an operation. Don't allow the banks to operate with money laundering cash, and hold them accountable and prosecute them as justice should prevail. That's what they should be doing to cut all this insanity. But they allow it to continue on, causing this casualty, and it's just making things worse.